He barely makes minimum wage. My cousin snickered at dinner. Then someone turned on the TV. Isn't that him getting an award from the mayor? I just enjoyed how they suddenly changed their tone and cut them off the next day. I, 32M, sat at the dinner table watching my cousin's mouth move, barely processing the words anymore. This was the fourth family gathering in 2 months where he'd found a way to bring up my financial situation, and honestly, I'd stopped caring somewhere around the second one. The mashed potatoes were better than his opinions anyway. My cousin worked in finance, wore suits that cost more than my monthly rent, and never let anyone forget it. He'd married into money, doubled it through inheritance, and now spent his evenings at family dinners reminding everyone else how they'd failed at life. Tonight, I was his favorite target again. He leaned back in his chair, wine glass in hand, and made sure everyone at the table could hear him when he said I barely made minimum wage. The way he said it, with that little laugh at the end, made it sound like I was some kind of charity case the family had to tolerate. My aunt nodded along sympathetically, and my uncle just focused harder on his plate. I kept eating. My job wasn't glamorous. I worked at a community center in one of the rougher neighborhoods downtown, helping kids with after-school programs, teaching basic life skills, running weekend workshops. The pay was terrible. The hours were long. The building had heating issues in winter, and the AC barely worked in summer. But I'd been doing it for 6 years, and I was good at it. My cousin didn't understand jobs that didn't come with expense accounts. He asked me, loud enough for the whole table, when I was planning to get a real career. His wife giggled into her napkin. I told him I was pretty happy where I was, and he looked at me like I'd just said I enjoyed eating dirt. The thing about my cousin was that he measured everything in dollar signs. Your worth, your success, your value as a human being. It all came down to your bank balance and your job title. He'd been this way since we were kids, always comparing grades and test scores and college acceptance letters. Now that we were adults, he'd just upgraded to comparing salaries and house sizes and vacation destinations. I could have told him the truth right there. I could have mentioned the letter I'd received 3 weeks ago, or the ceremony that had happened 5 days before this dinner, or the reason my boss had been grinning at me like an idiot all week. But watching him perform for the family, seeing how much he enjoyed putting me down, I decided the truth could wait. My aunt asked me if I'd thought about going back to school, getting an MBA maybe, something that could help me move up in the world. She meant well, but it still stung. I told her I was fine, that I liked what I did, that money wasn't everything. My cousin nearly choked on his wine laughing at that one. The dinner dragged on. My cousin moved on to other topics. His new car, his upcoming vacation to Europe, some investment property he was looking at. He circled back to me a few more times, though, just to make sure everyone remembered I was the family disappointment. Each time, I just nodded and kept eating. The roast was excellent. My grandmother had outdone herself. Then my uncle turned on the television. He wanted to catch the news, something about a local interest story he'd heard about at work. The TV flickered to life just as the evening news segment was starting, and I felt my stomach do a small flip. I knew what was coming. I'd been avoiding thinking about it all night, but there it was. The news anchor introduced a segment about community leadership awards. The mayor had spent the afternoon recognizing local heroes, people who'd made significant contributions to the city. They cut to footage from the ceremony, and there I was, standing on a stage in a borrowed suit, shaking hands with the mayor while a couple hundred people applauded. The room went completely silent. My aunt made a small noise that might have been a gasp. My uncle leaned forward, squinting at the screen. My grandmother put down her fork and smiled this massive, proud smile that made my chest tight. And my cousin just stared, his face cycling through about 5 different expressions before settling on something between shock and anger. The news anchor explained how I'd spent the last 6 years building programs that had helped over 2,000 kids in the city's most underserved neighborhoods. They mentioned the literacy initiative I'd started, the job training program for teenagers, the community garden project that had transformed an empty lot into something beautiful. The mayor called me an invaluable asset to the city and announced a grant, a substantial one, to expand my programs across 3 more neighborhoods. My aunt asked if that was really me. I told her it was. My uncle wanted to know why I hadn't mentioned any of this. I told him it had just happened, that I hadn't really processed it yet, that it didn't seem like a big deal. That last part was a lie. It was a huge deal. I just hadn't wanted to bring it up while my cousin was busy explaining how worthless my life was. My cousin tried to recover. He said something about how nice it was, how good it looked, how he'd always known I was doing important work. His tone had completely changed. Suddenly, he was my biggest supporter, acting like he'd been cheering me on this whole time. His wife jumped in too, gushing about how proud the family must be, how she'd always thought community work was so noble. I watched them scramble, watched them try to rewrite the last 2 hours of dinner conversation, and something cold settled in my chest. These people had spent years making me feel small. Every family gathering, every holiday, every casual lunch had turned into an opportunity to remind me that I wasn't successful enough, wasn't ambitious enough, wasn't enough. And now, because a TV screen had told them otherwise, suddenly, I mattered. The news segment ended. My grandmother reached over and squeezed my hand, telling me how proud she was. My uncle shook my hand, solid and firm, saying he'd always respected what I did. My aunt wanted to know all about the grant, how much it was, what I'd do with it. And my cousin just sat there, wine glass frozen halfway to his mouth, trying to figure out how to save face. I excused myself early, told everyone I had an early morning, needed to get home, thanked my grandmother for dinner. My cousin caught me at the door, hand on my shoulder like we were best friends. He said we should get lunch soon, catch up properly, that he'd love to hear more about my work. Maybe he could even help, connect me with some people, offer some financial advice for managing the grant. He smiled this big, fake smile that didn't reach his eyes. I told him I'd think about it. I wouldn't. Update 1. The next morning, I woke up to 7 missed calls and a dozen text messages. Most were from extended family members I'd barely heard from, suddenly very interested in my life and my work. 2 were from my cousin. I deleted those without reading them. My boss called around 9 to tell me the local paper wanted to do a feature story. Apparently, the news segment had gotten picked up, shared around social media, and now everyone wanted to know more about the community center and the programs we ran. She was thrilled. I was exhausted just thinking about it. The feature story ran 3 days later. They interviewed kids from the programs, parents who'd seen their teenagers transform, local business owners who'd partnered with us for job training. They quoted the mayor again, included photos from the ceremony, and laid out exactly what we'd accomplished over the past 6 years. The grant amount was mentioned. It was 6 figures, enough to change everything about how we operated. My phone exploded again. More family members, old friends from high school, people I'd barely spoken to in years. Everyone wanted to reconnect. Everyone had always believed in me. Everyone was so proud. I responded to my grandmother and my uncle. Everyone else could wait. My cousin called me directly the day after the article. He'd left the text messages and voicemails behind and went straight for the personal touch. He told me he'd been thinking a lot about our dinner conversation, about how he'd been too focused on traditional success metrics, about how he'd failed to appreciate what I was really doing. He sounded rehearsed. I let him talk. He went on for a while about how he wanted to support my work, how he'd been talking to his colleagues about potential donations, how he had connections that could really help the community center grow. Then he got to the real point. He wanted me to speak at his company's annual charity gala. They donated to various causes every year, and having me there, with my story and my recent recognition, would really impress the board and his bosses. I told him I'd consider it. He pressed harder, explaining how good this would be for both of us, how it could lead to major donations for my programs, how it would only take an hour of my time. I told him I was pretty busy with work, especially now with the grant implementation starting. He said he understood, but maybe I could just think about it, let him know in a few days. I knew what this was. This wasn't about helping my programs or supporting the community center. This was about him salvaging his image, showing his colleagues and his bosses that he was connected to someone who'd gotten recognized by the mayor. This was about him using my work to make himself look good. The realization didn't make me angry. It just made me tired. Over the next week, my cousin kept trying. He sent articles about corporate philanthropy, information about his company's charitable foundation, even a draft schedule for the gala. He'd already told people I was coming. He'd already mentioned me in planning meetings. He'd built this whole thing up without ever confirming I'd actually do it. His wife called me too. She was sweeter about it, less obvious, but the message was the same. They wanted to help. They wanted to be involved. They thought this could be such a wonderful partnership. She mentioned how much it would mean to my cousin, how he'd really been reflecting on his behavior, how he wanted to make things right. I let them both believe I was considering it right up until 3 days before the gala. Then I called my cousin and told him I wouldn't be attending. I explained that I'd thought about it carefully, but I didn't feel comfortable speaking at an event for people I didn't know, for a company I had no connection to. I suggested he could donate directly to the community center if he really wanted to support the work. The silence on the other end of the line stretched out for a solid 10 seconds. Then he asked me if I was serious. I told him I was. He said he'd already told everyone I was coming, that he'd built the whole evening around my appearance, that I was making him look bad. I told him that wasn't my problem. He got angry then. Really angry. He said I was being petty and small, that I was letting old grudges get in the way of helping the kids I claimed to care about so much. He said his company would have donated significantly, that I was throwing away real money out of spite. I asked him if he'd consider donating anyway, if he really cared about the cause. He hung up on me. His wife called an hour later. She was less sweet this time. She told me I was being selfish, that I didn't understand how much they'd invested in planning this event, how embarrassing it would be for them. She said I was ruining my cousin's reputation at his company. I told her he'd managed that pretty well on his own by promising something he hadn't confirmed. She said I'd regret this. I told her I really wouldn't. Update 2. The gala happened without me. I heard about it through my aunt, who'd been invited and gone despite everything. She said it was awkward. My cousin had tried to play it off, claimed I'd had a work emergency, but everyone knew something had gone wrong. His bosses weren't impressed. The whole evening had a weird energy, apparently. My aunt wanted to know why I'd backed out. She said it seemed like such a good opportunity, such a chance to build bridges and secure funding. I told her I didn't need bridges with people who only valued me after seeing me on TV. She went quiet for a moment, then said she understood but thought I was being too harsh. Maybe I was. Maybe I should have taken the high road, shown up, given the speech, let my cousin use my story to impress his colleagues. Maybe I should have accepted that people change their minds, that recognition changes how others see you, that this was just how the world worked. But I kept thinking about all those dinners, all those comments, all those years of being made to feel like my choices were wrong, like my work didn't matter, like I was wasting my life. And then one news segment, one award, one grant, and suddenly, everything was different. Suddenly, I was worth their time. The community center didn't need my cousin's company's donation. The grant from the city was substantial, and the news coverage had brought in smaller donations from people who actually cared about the work, not about being associated with someone who'd gotten recognition. We were fine. Better than fine. My cousin sent one more message 2 weeks after the gala. It was long, rambling, half apology and half accusation. He said he was sorry for how he'd treated me at dinner, but that I'd overreacted by refusing to help him. He said family was supposed to support each other, and I'd failed that basic test. He said I'd changed since getting the award, become arrogant and vindictive. I read it twice, then deleted it without responding. A month later, my grandmother had another family dinner. I almost didn't go, but she'd specifically asked me to be there, and I couldn't say no to her. I arrived late, hoping to avoid the pre-dinner awkwardness. My cousin was already there. We nodded at each other across the room, but didn't speak. His wife gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. My aunt tried too hard to make conversation with both of us, filling the silence with chatter about nothing. My uncle just looked tired. Dinner was tense. My cousin didn't make any comments about my job. He didn't make any comments about anyone's job. He mostly stayed quiet, answering questions when asked but not volunteering much. The change was jarring. This loud, opinionated person who dominated every family gathering I could remember had just deflated. Part of me felt bad for him. A small part. The rest of me remembered every snide comment, every condescending smile, every moment he'd made me feel worthless. And that part of me felt nothing but satisfaction. My grandmother asked how work was going. I told her about the new programs we were starting, the additional neighborhoods we'd be serving, the kids who'd gotten job placements through our training program. She beamed. My uncle asked good questions. My aunt listened intently. And my cousin just sat there, pushing food around his plate, not looking at anyone. After dinner, my grandmother pulled me aside. She thanked me for coming despite everything. She said she knew things were complicated with my cousin, but that family was important, and she hoped we could eventually move past whatever had happened. I told her I appreciated that, but some things took time. She looked at me with these sharp, knowing eyes and said she'd watched my cousin treat me poorly for years. She said she should have said something earlier, but had always hoped he'd grow out of it. She said she was proud of me for standing up for myself, even if it made family dinners awkward. Then she hugged me tight and told me to never let anyone make me feel small again. I left that dinner feeling lighter than I had in years. I'd spent so long trying to prove myself, trying to justify my choices, trying to make people understand that success wasn't just about money. And I'd finally stopped. I'd finally realized that the people who mattered already understood, and the people who didn't never would. My cousin and I haven't spoken since that dinner. We exist in the same family, attend the same gatherings, but we've become strangers who happen to share a grandmother. His wife doesn't call anymore. His fake interest in my work evaporated the moment I stopped being useful to him. And I'm fine with that. Better than fine. The community center is thriving. We've expanded into those 3 new neighborhoods, hired additional staff, doubled our program offerings. Kids who had nothing to do after school now have safe spaces to learn and grow. Teenagers who were heading nowhere now have job skills and opportunities. It's not glamorous work, and it'll never make me rich, but it matters. That's something my cousin will never understand. He measures worth in dollars and status and recognition. I measure it in kids who make it through high school, in families that stay together, in neighborhoods that become communities. We're playing different games entirely. Sometimes I wonder if cutting him off was too harsh. If I should have given him a chance to actually change, to genuinely support the work instead of just using it for his own benefit. But then I remember that dinner, that laugh when he said I barely made minimum wage, and I know I made the right choice. You don't get to spend years making someone feel worthless and then demand their help the moment they become useful to you. That's not how respect works. That's not how family works. And that's definitely not how redemption works. My cousin wanted access to my success without ever apologizing for how he'd treated my struggle. He wanted the benefits of association without the work of building an actual relationship. He wanted me to forget years of condescension because one award ceremony suddenly made me valuable in his eyes. I declined, and I'd decline again. The community center hosted an open house last month. Local families came through, saw the new programs, met the staff, watched what we'd built. The mayor stopped by, shook some hands, took some photos. It was a good day, the kind that reminded me why I'd chosen this path in the first place. My grandmother came, and my uncle. My aunt sent flowers with an apologetic note about having a work conflict. My cousin sent nothing, which was honestly a relief. The last thing I needed was him showing up, trying to insert himself into the celebration, making it about repairing his image instead of celebrating what we'd accomplished. The kids from the programs performed a showcase: poetry, music, presentations about what they'd learned. One teenager, this kid who'd been heading down a really bad path when he first came to us, talked about how the job training program had changed his trajectory. He'd gotten hired at a local business, was making enough to help his mom with bills, was looking at community college for the fall. He thanked the staff, thanked the community, and specifically thanked me for believing in him when he didn't believe in himself. That moment, standing in that room full of families and kids and community members, watching this teenager who'd turned his life around, that was worth more than every fake smile at every family dinner. That was worth more than my cousin's approval or his company's donation or any amount of recognition. Later that night, I got a text from my cousin. Just one line. Saw the photos from your open house. Looks like things are going well. I stared at it for a while, trying to figure out if it was genuine or another attempt to ease back into contact. I decided it didn't matter. I left it on read. Some bridges burn for good reason. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends or family who might enjoy it too. Your support means a lot to us.